Page 169 continued. Crowds flocked to cheer him in the pillory, and seeing that Defoe was making popularity out of persecution, his enemies bundled him off to Newgate prison. He turned this experience also to account by publishing a popular newspaper and by getting acquainted with rogues, pirates, smugglers, and miscellaneous outcasts, each one with a good story to be used later. After his release from prison in 1704, he turned his knowledge of criminals to further account and entered the government employ as a kind of spy or secret service agent. His prison experience and the further knowledge of criminals gained in over 20 years as a spy accounts for his numerous short stories of thieves and pirates like Jonathan Wild and Captain Avery, and also for his later novels, which deal almost exclusively with villains and outcasts. When Defoe was nearly 60 years of age, he turned to fiction and wrote the great work by which he is remembered. Robinson Crusoe was an instant success, and the author became famous all over Europe. Other stories followed rapidly, and Defoe earned money enough to retire to Newington and live in comfort, but not idly, for his activity in producing fiction is rivaled only by that of Walter Scott. Thus, in 1720 appeared Captain Singleton, Duncan Campbell, and Memoirs of a Cavalier. In 1722, Colonel Jack, Moll Flanders, and the amazingly realistic Journal of the Plague Year. So the list grows with astonishing rapidity, ending with the History of the Devil in 1726. In the latter year, Defoe's secret connection with the government became known, and a great howl of indignation rose against him in the public print, destroying in an hour the popularity which he had gained by a lifetime of intrigue and labor. He fled from his home in London, where he died obscurely in 1731 while hiding from real or imaginary enemies. Works of Defoe. At the head of the list stands Robinson Crusoe, 1719 to 1720, one of the few books in any literature which has held its popularity undiminished for nearly 2 centuries. The story is based upon the experiences of Alexander Selkirk or Selkirk, who had been marooned in the island of Juan Fernandez off the coast of Chile, and who had lived there in solitude for 5 years. On his return to England in 1709, Selkirk's experience became known, and Steele published an account of them in the Englishman without, however, attracting any wide attention. End of page 169. Now page 170. That Defoe used Selkirk's story is practically certain, but with his usual duplicity, he claimed to have written Crusoe in 1708, a year before Selkirk's return. However that may be, the story itself is real enough to have come straight from a sailor's logbook. Defoe, as shown in his Journal of the Plague Year and his Memories of a Cavalier, had the art of describing things he had never seen with the minute accuracy of an eyewitness. The charm of the story is its intense reality in the succession of thoughts feelings, incidents which every reader recognizes to be absolutely true to life. At first glance, it would seem that one man on a desert island could not possibly furnish the material for a long story, but as we read, we realize that with amazement that every slightest thought and action, the saving of the cargo of the shipwrecked vessel, the preparation for defense against imaginary foes, the intense agitation over the discovery of a footprint in the sand, is a record of what the reader himself would do and feel if he were alone in such a place. Defoe's long and varied experience now stood him in good stead. In fact, he was the only man of letters in his time who might have been thrown on a desert island without finding himself at a loss what to do, and he puts himself so perfectly in his hero's place that he repeats the blunders as well as his triumphs. Thus what reader ever followed Defoe's hero through weary, feverish months of building a huge boat which was too big to be launched by one man, without recalling some boy who spent many stormy nights in a shed or cellar building a boat or a dog house, and who, when the thing was painted and finished, found it a foot wider than the door and had to knock it to pieces. This absolute naturalness characterizes the whole story. It is a study of the human life, human will also, of patience, fortitude, and the indomitable Saxon spirit, overcoming all obstacles. And it was this element which made Rousseau recommend Robinson Crusoe as a better treatise on education than anything which Aristotle or the moderns have ever written. This absolute naturalness characterizes the whole story. It is a study of the human will, also of patience, fortitude, and the indomitable Saxon spirit, overcoming all obstacles. And it was this element which made Rousseau recommend Robinson Crusoe as a better treatise on education than anything which Aristotle or the moderns have ever written. And this suggests the most significant thing about Defoe's masterpiece, namely that the hero represents the whole of human society, doing with his own hands all the things which by the division of labor and demands of modern civilization are now done by many different workers. It is therefore the type of the whole civilized race of men. In the remaining works of Defoe, more than 200 in number, there is an astonishing variety, but all are marked by the same simple narrative style and the same intense realism. The best known of these are the Journal of the Plague Year, in which the horrors of the frightful plague are minutely recorded. The members of a cavalier so realistic that Chatham quoted it as history in Parliament, and several picturesque novels like Captain Singleton, Colonel Jack, Noll Flanders, and Roxana, the last work written in by some critics given a very high place in realistic fiction, but like the other three, and like Defoe's minor narratives of Jack Shepherd and Cartouche, it is disagreeable study of vice ending with a forced and unnatural repentance. Samuel Richardson, 1689 to 1761. To Richardson belongs the credit of writing the first modern novel. He was the son of a London joiner who, for economy's sake, resided in some unknown town in Derbyshire, where Samuel was born in 1689. The boy received very little education, but he had a natural talent for writing letters, and even as a boy, we find him frequently employed by working girls to write their love letters for them. This early experience, together with his fondness for the society of his dearest ladies rather than of men, gave him that intimate knowledge of the hearts of sentimental and uneducated women which is manifested in all his work. Moreover, he was a keen observer of manners, and his surprisingly accurate descriptions often compel us to listen, even when he is most tedious. At 17 years of age, he went to London and learned the printer's trade, which he followed to the end of his life. When 50 years of age, he had a small reputation as a writer of elegant epistles, and his reputation led certain publishers to approach him with the proposal that he write a series of familiar letters which could be used as models by people unused to writing. Richardson gladly accepted the proposal and had the happy inspiration to make these letters tell the connected story of a girl's life. Defoe had told as adventure story of human life on a desert island, but Richardson would tell the story of a girl's inner life in the midst of English neighbors. End of page 170, now page 171. That sounds simple enough now, but it marked an epoch in the history of literature. Like every great and simple discovery, it makes us wonder why someone had not thought of it before. Richardson's novels. The result of Richardson's inspiration was Pamela or Virtue Rewarded, and in this series of letters telling of the trials, tribulations, and the final happy marriage of a too sweet young maiden, published in 4 volumes extending over the years 1740 to 1741. Its chief fame lies in the fact that it is our first novel in the modern sense. Aside from the important fact and viewed solely as a novel, it is sentimental, grandiloquent and wearisome. Its success at the time was enormous, and Richardson began another series of letters. He could tell a story in no other way, which occupied his leisure hours for the next 6 years. Aside from this important fact, and viewed solely as a novel, It is sentimental, grandiloquent, and wearisome. Its success at the time was enormous, and Richardson began another series of letters. He could tell a story in no other way, which occupied his leisure hours for the next 6 years. The result was Clarissa, or The History of a Young Lady, published in 8 volumes in 1747 to 1748. This was another and somewhat better sentimental novel, and it was received with immense enthusiasm. Of all Richardson's heroines, Clarissa is the most human. In her doubts and scruples of conscience, and especially in her bitter grief and humiliation, she is a real woman, in marked contrast with the mechanical hero Lovelace, who simply illustrates the author's inability to portray a man's character. The dramatic element in this novel is strong and is increased by means of the letters, which enable the reader to keep close to the characters of the story and to see life from their different points of view. Macaulay, who was deeply impressed by Clarissa, is said to have made the remark that were the novel lost, he would restore almost the whole of it from memory. Richardson now turned from his middle-class heroines, and in 5 or 6 years completed another series of letters in which he attempted to tell the story of a man and an aristocrat. The result was Sir Charles Grandison in 1754, a novel in several volumes whose hero was intended to be a model of aristocratic manners and virtues for the middle class people, who largely constituted the novelist's readers. For Richardson, who began in Pamela with the purpose of teaching his hearers how to write, ended with the different purpose of teaching them how to live, and in most of his work, his chief object was, in his own words, to inculcate virtue and good deportment. For Richardson, who began in Pamela with the purpose of teaching his heroines how to write, ended with the deliberate purpose of teaching them how to live, and in most of his work, his chief object was, in his own words, to inculcate virtue and good deportment. His novels therefore suffer as much from his purpose as from his own limitations. Notwithstanding the tedious moralizing and his other defects, Richardson in the 3 books gave something entirely new to the literary world, and the world appreciated the gift. This was the story of human life, told from within, and depending for its material and its interest not on incident or adventure, but on its truth to human nature. Reading his work is, on the whole, like examining the antiquated model of a stern-wheeled steamer. It is interesting for its undeveloped possibilities rather than for its achievements.